She fought through a blizzard to save her children. But could a stranger's heart become their home? The Idaho wind howled like a chorus of wolves, tearing through the Snake River Valley with a fury that swallowed the world in white. Snow slashed, sideways, sharp as knives, stinging the faces of those foolish enough to defy it. Eliza Cooper, 28, trudged forward, her dark brown hair plastered beneath a fraying gray bonnet. Her green eyes narrowed against the storm. Her woolen dress, once a proud shade of slate, clung damply to her frame, patched at the knees, from months of mending. A seamstress by trade, she'd stitched her life together with the same stubborn thread, until Matthew Crowley unraveled it. 3 days ago, he'd left her at a crumbling depot in Snake River, his brown eyes cold as he sneered. "You're a fool to keep those children, Eliza. They'll drag you down." She'd clutched her shawl and refused to beg, even as his wagon vanished into the dusk. Now, with half a sack of oats and no map, she led her 3 children through the blizzard, their small forms barely visible in the swirling snow. Nathan, 10, his brown hair tucked under a patched cap, gripped his sister's hand, his green eyes fierce with a boy's fragile courage. Laya, 8, stumbled in her 2 large boots, her scarf slipping to reveal a pale, trembling chin. Ben, only 5, clung to Eliza's skirt, his tiny voice lost in the wind's scream. Eliza's legs trembled, her lips bleeding from the cold. Each step was a prayer, each breath a defiance. She couldn't stop, not after Matthew's betrayal, not when her children's lives hung by the thread of her will. "Keep going," she rasped, her voice barely audible. Nathan nodded, pulling Laya closer while Ben's whimpers pierced her heart. The world was a void of white, no trails, no stars until a flicker. A golden light danced through the pines, faint as a dying ember. A house. A farmstead, its stone chimney puffing smoke against the storm's wrath. Relief buckled Eliza's knees, but she forced herself upright. "There," she whispered, pointing. "We're almost there." They staggered the final yards, the snow swallowing their footprints. The house loomed, its timber walls weathered but sturdy, a barn shadowed nearby. Eliza pounded the oak door, her knuckles raw. Once, twice. Silence. "Please," she croaked, banging harder. Ben shivered against her. Laya's teeth chattered and Nathan's eyes begged for hope. The door creaked open. A man stood framed by firelight, his presence as solid as the pines outside. Jonas Hale, 38, was lean and tall, his black hair tied back in a loose knot, his gray eyes sharp with wariness. His dark leather jacket, patched at the elbows, hung open over a faded blue shirt, his boots scuffed from years of taming the land. A farmer who'd lost his brother to a river flood. He'd chosen solitude over sorrow. His gaze swept over Eliza, then softened at the sight of the children, their faces pale as frost. "Who are you?" Jonas asked, his voice low, rough as gravel. Eliza's throat burned, but she forced out words. "Eliza Cooper, my children, we're lost." Nathan held Laya's hand. Ben buried his face in Eliza's skirt. Jonas's jaw tightened, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, crossing his face. He stepped aside. "Come in. Warm yourselves." Eliza ushered the children inside, her heart pounding with gratitude. The door slammed shut, muffling the storm's roar. The parlor glowed with warmth, a stone hearth crackling, its flames dancing, across pine walls adorned with tools and a single faded quilt. Jonas pulled chairs near the fire, his movements brisk but deliberate. "Sit," he said, tossing logs into the flames. Eliza peeled wet scarves from her children, her fingers trembling. Nathan helped Laya, his small hands steady, while Ben curled into Eliza's lap, his mittens dripping. Jonas returned with a kettle, pouring steaming water into tin mugs. "Drink, it's not much, but it'll thaw you." Eliza took a mug, her hands shaking, and met his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. Jonas nodded, stirring the fire, sparks leaping like stars. "How far'd you come?" he asked, his tone guarded. Eliza swallowed. 3 days. From the depot. He Left us. Her eyes flicked to the children now huddling close. Jonas didn't press, his silence a kind of mercy. You're safe for now, he said finally, leaning back against a scarred table. Storm's too fierce to move. Eliza's chest loosened. A sob caught in her throat. She held Ben tighter, her eyes locked on the fire. For the first time in days, warmth seeped into her bones. But as the flames danced, a question lingered. Could safety last in a stranger's home? Yet in the heart of the storm, could a flicker of kindness spark something more? Stay tuned, the winds hide secrets. The storm still raged beyond the timber walls of Jonas Hale's farmstead, its wail muffled but relentless, like a beast clawing at the edges of the Snake River Valley. Inside, the parlor glowed with the steady pulse of the hearth, its flames casting long shadows across the pine floor. Eliza Cooper sat near the fire, her dark brown hair now loose from its bonnet, curling damply against her neck. Her green eyes, weary but sharp, watched her children as they huddled under a faded quilt, their small chests rising and falling with exhausted sleep. Nathan, 10, lay protectively beside Laya, 8, whose patched scarf was clutched in her fist. Ben, 5, curled into a ball, his brown curls peeking out, his mittens discarded beside a tin mug. Eliza's hands, still raw from the cold, trembled as she sipped the steaming water Jonas had given her. The warmth of the slate-gray wool dress, patched but clean, felt like a luxury after days in the blizzard. Yet her heart was heavy, tethered to the memory of Matthew Crowley's betrayal. His words echoed in her mind. You're a fool to keep those children, Eliza. A seamstress who'd once stitched gowns for Boise's finest, she'd trusted Matthew's promises of a new life, until he abandoned her and her children at the depot, his vest pristine as he drove away. Jonas moved quietly across the room, his dark leather jacket now hung on a peg, revealing a faded blue shirt that clung to his lean frame. At 38, his black hair, tied loosely at the nape, framed a face etched with lines of loss. His brother, swept away by a river's wrath years ago. He knelt by the hearth, feeding logs to the fire, his gray eyes catching the light like polished steel. They'll sleep sound, he said, glancing at the children. Cold's out of them now. Eliza nodded, her voice hoarse. I can't, thank you enough, Mr. Hale. She hesitated, then added, I'm Eliza Cooper. These are Nathan, Leah, and Ben. Jonas gave a curt nod, stirring the embers. Jonas, he replied, his tone clipped but not unkind. He rose, leaning against the scarred table, arms crossed. What brought you out in that storm? The question landed like a stone. Eliza's fingers tightened around the mug, her gaze dropping to the fire. We had nowhere else, she said softly. 3 days ago at the Snake River Depot, he left us, said the children were a burden. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. I'm a seamstress, or was. Thought I'd find work west, but she trailed off, eyes flicking to her sleeping children. I couldn't leave them. Not ever. Jonas's jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his face. He didn't speak for a long moment, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Man like that don't know what he's lost, he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. Eliza looked up, startled by the conviction in his words. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of wounds carried in silence. Jonas had lost his brother, his only kin, to the river's greed. Eliza had lost her trust to a man's deceit. You can stay till the storm breaks, Jonas said, turning back to the fire. Ain't much, but it's warm. He gestured to the parlor, its walls lined with tools and a single shelf of weathered books. A farmer's life, simple but deliberate. Eliza's throat tightened with gratitude. You didn't have to take us in, she whispered. Jonas shrugged, his back to her. Couldn't leave you to the snow. Eliza watched him, the way his shoulders carried the weight of solitude. Nathan stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and Jonas glanced over, his expression softening. They're strong, he said quietly. like their mother. Eliza's chest ached, a sob caught in her throat. She'd fought so hard to be strong, but here, in the glow of a stranger's fire, she felt the cracks in her armor. The flames danced, casting warmth across the children's faces. Eliza tucked the quilt tighter around Ben, her fingers lingering on his curls. Jonas sat across the room, sharpening a knife with slow, practiced strokes, his silence a steady presence. Outside the blizzard howled, but inside a fragile trust began to take root. Yet as Eliza closed her eyes, a shadow lingered. Could a heart so guarded ever open to more than shelter? But as the storm raged on, could the warmth of a stranger's home mend their broken spirits, the fire hold secrets, watch on? Dawn broke over the Snake River Valley, its pale light filtering through a veil of thinning snow. The storm had softened, no longer a howling beast, but a whispering ghost, dusting the pines with delicate frost. Inside Jonas Hale's farmstead, the hearth glowed steadily, its warmth weaving through the pine-walled parlor like a promise. Eliza Cooper stirred from a restless sleep, her dark brown hair spilling over the quilt she'd shared with Ben. Her green eyes, shadowed by exhaustion, scanned the room. Nathan and Leah lay curled nearby, their brown curls soft in the firelight, their patched coats draped over a chair. The slate-gray wool of Eliza's dress, still damp at the hem, felt heavy as she rose, her seamstress's hands itching to mend something, anything, to quiet her racing thoughts. Outside, the world was still, the snow blanketing the fields in a hush. Jonas was already up, his lean frame moving through the frosted yard, his black hair tied back, his dark leather jacket dusted with snow. At 38, he carried the weight of a farmer's life, his gray eyes sharp as he checked the barn's fences, his hands calloused from years of coaxing life from stubborn soil. Eliza stepped onto the porch, pulling her fraying shawl tight. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft but steady. Jonas glanced over, wiping frost from his brow. "Work don't wait for storms," he replied, his tone gruff but not unkind. He nodded toward a pile of split logs. "Could use a hand stacking those if you're not too worn." Eliza's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through her weariness. "I've carried 3 children through a blizzard," she said. "I can handle a few logs." Together, they worked in the crisp morning air, Eliza stacking wood with a seamstress's precision, Jonas splitting logs with clean practice swings. Nathan emerged, rubbing sleep from his green eyes, and Jonas handed him a smaller axe. "Swing from the shoulder, not the wrist," Jonas said, guiding the boy's hands. Nathan nodded, his jaw set, eager to prove himself. Leah and Ben soon followed, their boots crunching in the snow. Leah, clutching her scarf, watched Jonas with quiet curiosity, while Ben, ever bold, tugged at Jonas's sleeve. "Do you got chickens? Can I feed 'em?" he asked, his voice bright. Jonas's gray eyes softened, a rare warmth flickering. "Barn's got a few hens," he said. "Come on, I'll show you." He led Ben to the barn, the boy's questions, tumbling out like pebbles in a stream. "Do they lay eggs every day? What if a fox comes?" Jonas answered each one, his voice low and patient, a stark contrast to the solitude he'd worn like armor. Eliza watched from the porch, her heart catching at the sight of Ben's smile, so rare since Matthew's betrayal. Inside, Leah helped Eliza knead dough for soda bread, her small hands clumsy but earnest. "Is Mr. Jonas always alone?" Leah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eliza paused, her fingers still in the flour. "I think so," she said softly. "But he's kind, Leah. Kinder than most." Leah nodded, her eyes drifting to the shelf of books Jonas kept, their spines worn but cherished. The parlor, with its stone hearth and faded quilt, felt less like a stranger's house and more like a haven. By noon, the air carried a hint of thaw, the snow melting in patches around the barn. Jonas and Nathan returned, their cheeks flushed from work, while Ben trailed behind, proudly clutching a basket of eggs. Eliza set the bread on the table, its crust golden, and poured coffee from a battered pot. Jonas took a sip, his gaze settling on Eliza. "You're good with your hands," he said, nodding to the bread. "Seamstress, you said?" "Used to be," Eliza replied, her voice tinged with loss. "Sewed for folks in Boise till—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking to the children. Jonas didn't press, but his silence invited truth. "You've got away with them," she said, changing the subject. "Ben don't talk to just anyone." Jonas shrugged, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Kids see through masks," he said. "Ain't much to hide from them." Eliza's chest warmed, a fragile hope taking root. Nathan laughed as Ben recounted his chicken-feeding adventure, and Laya joined in, her shyness easing. The table, scarred but sturdy, held more than bread. It held laughter, a sound Eliza hadn't heard in months. Yet as she watched Jonas, his gray eyes distant despite his smile, a shadow crept into her thoughts. The storm was fading, and with it their excuse to stay. What would tomorrow bring for a woman with nothing but 3 children and a broken past? But as laughter filled the farmstead, could a stranger's kindness withstand the shadows of yesterday? The thaw reveals more than snow. Stay tuned. The Idaho sun hung low over the Snake River Valley, its golden rays piercing the last wisps of the storm's frost, painting the pines in hues of amber and green. Jonas Hale's farmstead stood quiet, the snow around its timber walls melting into rivulets that whispered past the barn. Inside, the parlor hummed with fragile warmth, the stone hearth's embers glowing like a fading heartbeat. Eliza Cooper knelt by the table, her dark brown hair tied loosely. Her green eyes focused as she mended a tear in Laya's scarf with a seamstress's steady hand. Her slate-gray wool dress, patched but proud, caught the firelight, a testament to her resilience. Nathan, 10, sat nearby, whittling a stick under Jonas's guidance, while Laya, 8, braided Ben's brown curls, the 5-year-old giggling softly. Outside, Jonas worked in the yard, his black hair bound at the nape, his dark leather jacket open to the warming air. At 38, his gray eyes carried the weight of a farmer's solitude, softened only by the children's laughter that now echoed through his once silent life. He hammered a loose fence post, his movements deliberate, when a distant sound froze his hand, the steady clop of hooves unhurried, deliberate. His gaze narrowed toward the ridge, where 3 riders emerged from the pines, their silhouettes sharp against the dusk. The lead rider dismounted, his boots sinking into the thawing mud. Matthew Crowley, 35, cut a striking figure, his blonde hair slicked beneath a felt hat, his brown eyes glinting with calculated charm. His green wool vest, tailored and pristine, marked him as a Boise merchant, a man who wielded wealth like a weapon. 2 hired men flanked him, their faces hard, their hands resting on pistols. Jonas set down his hammer, his jaw tight, and stepped toward the gate. Eliza appeared at the door, wiping flour from her hands, her breath catching as she recognized Matthew. "No," she whispered, her face draining of color. Nathan, Leia, and Ben crowded behind her, their green eyes wide with fear. Matthew's lips curled into a smile, cold as the snow that lingered in the shadows. "Eliza, darlin'," he drawled, tipping his hat. "You've been hard to find." "What do you want?" Eliza asked, her voice thin but defiant, stepping onto the porch to shield her children. Matthew's smile widened, his tone mockingly gentle. "I've come for what's mine. Those children belong with me. I've got a court order, paid for fair and square in Boise." He pulled a folded paper from his vest, waving it like a flag. "You can't run forever, Eliza. Not from me." Eliza's hands trembled, but she stood tall. "You left us to die. At that depot," she said, her voice rising. "You called them a burden. They're my blood, not your prize." Nathan gripped Leah's hand. Ben clung to Eliza's skirt, their small faces pale but resolute. Matthew chuckled, his eyes flicking, to Jonas. "And who's this, the farmer playing hero? Mighty convenient you taking in a runaway woman and her brats." Jonas stepped forward, his gray eyes cold as steel. "You're on my land," he said, his voice low, unyielding. "You left them to the snow. I didn't. Say your piece and go." Matthew's charm faltered, his lips twitching. "The law's on my side, friend," he snapped. "I'll be back tomorrow with the sheriff. Hand over the children or I'll take them by force." He mounted his horse, nodding to his men. "Think it over, Eliza. You know I don't lose." The OE riders vanished into the pines, their hoofbeats fading like a storm's echo. Inside, the parlor felt smaller, the hearth's warmth no match for the dread that settled over the family. Nathan sat stiffly, his whittling knife forgotten, while Leah hugged Ben, her voice trembling. "Are we gonna have to go with him, Mama?" Eliza knelt, pulling them close, her eyes burning. "No," she whispered fiercely. "You're staying right here." Jonas stood by the window, his silhouette rigid against the fading light. "Eliza," rose, her voice breaking. "He's got money, Jonas. The courts listen to men like him. What can I do?" Jonas turned, his gray eyes steady, a fire kindling within them. "You don't fight him alone," he said, his words a vow. "This land, these walls, they're yours now too. We hold the line together." Eliza's breath caught, her hand, brushing his arm, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of trust. The children watched, their fear tempered by hope. Outside, the valley lay still, but a new storm was brewing, one that would test the fragile home they'd begun to build. Yet, as they stood united, could their courage outlast a man who bought the law? The battle looms, don't miss what's next. The morning sun rose sharp and cold over the Snake River Valley, its light glinting off the thawing fields, casting long shadows across Jonas Hale's farmstead. The air was brittle, the last traces of snow clinging to the pines like a fading memory. Inside the parlor, Eliza Cooper moved with quiet purpose, her dark brown hair pinned neatly, her green eyes fierce with resolve. Her slate gray wool dress, patched but dignified, swayed as she folded the children's coats, her seamstress's hands steady despite the dread knotting her stomach. Nathan, 10, stood by the hearth, his brown curls damp with sweat, his green eyes fixed on the door. Leah, 8, clutched Ben's hand, the 5-year-old's face pale, his questions silenced by the weight of yesterday's threat. Jonas stood on the porch, his black hair tied back, his dark leather jacket taut across his shoulders. At 38, his gray eyes scanned the ridge, his farmer's hands gripping a rifle, not with intent to harm, but as a line drawn in the earth. Matthew Crowley's words echoed in his mind. "I'll be back with the sheriff." The valley was still, but Jonas knew storms didn't always come with wind. The hoofbeats came at noon, steady and deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade. 4 riders crested the ridge, their silhouettes stark against the sun. Matthew Crowley led, his blonde hair gleaming beneath his felt hat, his green vest a mocking splash of wealth. Beside him rode Sheriff Amos, a wiry man with a gray mustache, his badge glinting like a bought prize. 2 hired men followed, their pistols holstered but prominent. Eliza stepped onto the porch, her children behind her, their small hands clinging to her skirt. "Stay strong," she whispered, her voice a lifeline. Matthew dismounted, his brown eyes glinting with triumph. "Eliza," he called, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Time's up. The sheriff's got my court order. Those children come with me." Sheriff Amos unfolded a creased paper, reading in a monotone. "By order of the Boise court, Eliza Cooper is to surrender custody to Matthew Crowley." Matthew's smile was a predator's, his gaze flicking to Jonas. "Step aside, farmer. The law's spoken." Jonas didn't move, his rifle resting against the porch rail, his gray eyes unyielding. "Law bought with coin ain't justice," he said, his voice low, cutting. "You left them to die in that depot. You don't get to claim them now." Eliza's heart pounded, her hands balling into fists. "They're my children," she said, her voice rising clear as a bell. "You abandoned us, Matthew. Your money can't rewrite that." Matthew's smile faltered, his jaw tightening. "You'll regret this," he snapped, nodding to the sheriff. But before Amos could speak, a new sound broke the tension. Boots crunching, voices rising. From the trail, a small crowd emerged. Widow Harlan, her shawl tight against the chill. Reverend Pike, his Bible tucked under his arm. And Amos Tanner, the blacksmith, his apron still dusted with soot. More followed, townsfolk who'd seen Eliza's quiet strength, her children's laughter in the market. "We stand with Eliza," Widow Harlan said, her voice firm, stepping beside Jonas. "Reverend," Pike nodded, his eyes kind but resolute. "She's raised those children with more love than you'll ever know, Crowley." Tanner crossed his arms, his bulk a silent challenge. "This town knows a coward when it sees one." The crowd murmured agreement, their presence a wall of defiance. Matthew's confidence cracked, his eyes darting between the townsfolk and Jonas's unflinching stare. "This is my right," he shouted, but his voice wavered. Sheriff Amos shifted, his badge suddenly heavy. "Crowley," he muttered, "paper's only good if folks enforce it. I ain't fighting a whole town." Matthew's face darkened, his hands clenching. With a bitter curse, he shoved the order back at Amos and stormed to his horse. "You'll pay for this," he hissed, mounting up. The riders retreated, their hoofbeats fading into the valley's hush. The townsfolk lingered, offering Eliza soft words before drifting back to their homes. Inside, the parlor felt lighter, the hearth's glow a beacon of hope. Eliza knelt, hugging Nathan, Leah, and Ben, her tears falling silently. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice trembling. With relief, Jonas stood by the door, his rifle set aside, his gray eyes soft as they met hers. "You didn't have to do that," Eliza said, rising, her hand brushing his sleeve. "Stand up for us like that." Jonas's lips curved, a rare warmth breaking through. "Had to," he said simply. "You're worth fighting for." Eliza's breath caught, her fingers lingering on his arm, a spark of something deeper kindling between them. The children watched, their smiles tentative but growing. Yet as the sun dipped low, a shadow lingered. Matthew's parting words carried a promise of vengeance. But even as victory warmed their hearts, could a vengeful shadow return to shatter their home? "The fight isn't over. Watch on." But even as victory warmed their hearts, could a vengeful shadow return to shatter their home? "The fight isn't over. Watch on." Spring crept into the Snake River Valley, its tender warmth melting the last snow from the pines, coaxing green shoots from the earth around Jonas Hale's farmstead. The creek behind the barn sang with new life, its waters sparkling under a wide, unyielding sky. Inside the parlor, Eliza Cooper moved with a quiet grace, her dark brown hair loose, her green eyes bright with a hope she'd thought lost. Her slate-gray wool dress, patched but cherished, brushed the pine floor as she stirred a pot of stew, the scent of sage and onions mingling with the hearth's glow. Nathan, 10, sat at the table, his brown curls catching the light, his green eyes focused as he mended a harness under Jonas's watchful gaze. Leah, 8, wove a daisy chain for Ben, the 5-year-old laughing as he chased a butterfly across the room, his joy a melody in the once silent house. Jonas stood by the window, his black hair tied back, his dark leather jacket slung over a chair, revealing a faded blue shirt that clung to his lean frame. At 38, his gray eyes held a softness that hadn't existed before Eliza and her children arrived, their laughter filling the voids left by his brother's death. He'd been a farmer content with solitude, but now the parlor's warmth, the children's voices felt like home. Yet a shadow lingered, Matthew Crowley's final threat. "You'll pay for this." The hoofbeats came at dusk, solitary and slow, lacking the arrogance of before. Jonas stepped onto the porch, his hand resting lightly on the rail, his gaze fixed on the ridge. Matthew Crowley appeared alone, his blonde hair disheveled, his green vest creased with dust. The Boise merchant's brown eyes, once sharp with cunning, now carried a weary defeat. He dismounted, his boots dragging in the soft earth, his shoulders slumped under the weight of failure. Eliza joined Jonas, her hand brushing his, a silent anchor. Nathan, Leah, and Ben stood behind her, their faces resolute, no longer cowed by the man who'd abandoned them. Matthew's gaze swept over them, his lips twisting. "I came for the children," he said, his voice hollow. "One last time." Jonas's jaw tightened, his gray eyes unyielding. "You got no claim here," he said. "Not after what you did." Eliza stepped forward, her voice clear, unwavering. "You left us to freeze, Matthew. You called them a burden. They're my heart, and this is their home." Nathan spoke, his young voice steady. "You ain't our family. Jonas is." Leah nodded, her daisy chain clutched tightly. "He's the one who stayed." Ben, small but bold, added, "He's our pa." Matthew flinched, the word pa striking deeper than any blade. His eyes met Eliza's, searching for a flicker of doubt, but found only certainty. "You've lost," Jonas said, his voice low. "Final. Go and don't come back." Matthew's hands clenched, but the fight had drained from him. With a muttered curse, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode into the fading light, his silhouette swallowed by the pines. This time, the valley felt lighter, as if the last storm had finally passed. That evening, the farmstead glowed with a warmth that rivaled the hearth. Eliza and Jonas sat by the fire, the children tucked into their shared room, their soft giggles drifting through the walls. Eliza's fingers traced the edge of her mug, her green eyes meeting Jonas's. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice soft. "Afraid I'd never find a place to belong again." Jonas reached for her hand, his calloused fingers lacing with hers. "You belong here," he said, his gray eyes steady. "You and them. Always." Eliza's breath caught, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You gave us more than a roof, Jonas. You gave us a home." She leaned forward, her lips brushing his, a kiss soft but sure, sealed with the promise of tomorrows. Jonas held her close, his arms a haven, his heart no longer bound by solitude. "Stay," he whispered. "Make this our life." Eliza nodded, her smile radiant. "We already have." As spring bloomed, the farmstead thrived. Nathan learned to plow, his hands growing sure. Leah read Jonas's books aloud, her voice bright. Ben fed the hens, his laughter echoing across the fields. The valley, once a place of survival, became a tapestry of love, woven from courage and choice. In the 1870s, women like Eliza defied the odds, building families not just by blood but by heart, their strength shaping the American frontier. Their stories remind us that home is not a place, but the people who stand beside you. What would you fight for to protect your family? Share your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe for more tales of love and courage from the frontier. Hit the bell to never miss a story that warms the heart and stirs the soul. In a world of snow and shadows, they chose love over fear. What will you choose? Join our community and share your story.